Hello, bonjour, Alberta. Did you know that at least 238,000 people speak Français in Alberta? And those numbers just keep on growing? Oui, oui, c'est vrai, it's true. And thanks to Shaw TV Community Access Programming, we get to reach out to everyone to let you know all about special people, places, events, and activities happening right here in this great province, in both English and en français. That's right, mes amis. We begin the first part of our program in English, and then we repeat it en français. So stay with us. Restez à l'écoute.
Welcome and bienvenue to Hello Bonjour Alberta. I'm Marc Lalonde.
And I'm Anne Boiteau.
We're in our 11th season now, and we're celebrating the twinning of the cities of Calgary and Quebec City. We have two very interesting guests for you today. We have Cheri Woolsey, who is managing partner and psychologist at Inspired Minds, and associated with Inspired Minds, we have Geneviève Wright, an integrative energy healing practitioner. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start off by finding out something about each of you. Let's start with you, Geneviève. What's your life been like so far? Where were you born? How did you end up here?
I was born in the Ottawa area, and I had a career on Parliament Hill as a simultaneous interpreter.
Oh.
And then I moved to Canmore for love. And I'm still there for love. It's just a different kind of love. And I went back to school about 10 years ago and went into integrative energy healing. And I've woven in some other skills since then and joined Inspired Minds as an associate practitioner in October.
So was it your personal kind of life that led you to that those studies, or did you just read about that, or how did you decide to go from translating to healing?
It was certainly some events, personal events for sure, big growth transition periods, but also I've always been interested in health and wellness since I was a little girl. And I knew there was more than just the nuts and bolts. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Cheri, what part of the world are you from?
I'm from a small town in northwestern Ontario called Fort Frances, and I moved out to Calgary in 2003. So I came out here to further my education, and when I finished my master's degree, I started working as a psychologist.
And what led you to be interested in the career as a psychologist?
Well, I think I've always liked sort of working with people, and I find the mind very intriguing, and just kind of understanding people and how they work and why they do the things they do.
There is a reason for that?
I'm still trying to figure that part out.
Okay.
But
Well, when you do, you let me know.
yeah.
And then you decided to start a wellness center. How did that come about?
I was working as a psychologist with a group of psychologists there, and it was primarily just talk therapy, and I always found that there's such an integration between mind and body, and so wanting to kind of bring that all together and work from more of a holistic approach, and so that's when Inspired Minds kind of came to fruition.
So describe the center to us. What services do you have at the center and this sort of thing?
Our primary focus is the psychologist, and we have a couple of psychologists, and we have a social worker that works there as well. And then working more with sort of that mind-body connection, we have Geneviève, who's our integrative energy healer. We have a dietitian who's working with people in health and wellness from that perspective. And then we have yoga and meditation classes that run as well.
It is a center.
Yes, yeah, we're hoping that when people come, they can get most of their wellness needs met at our agency.
Okay, and so the types of clients who would look you up, who would like your services, describe a bit the psychological aspect of the work there.
So the majority of our clients, I think, that come are really wanting to find some assistance in managing a lot of their emotions, and some people have really heightened emotions and it lends to them being quite distressed at times, and so they're looking for services to help them learn some coping mechanisms. We also work with people who have depression, anxiety, substance use, eating disorders, so there's a breadth of clientele with various needs that all come, and we provide a therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And so that's all the talk piece of what the psychologists do, and then depending on the specific needs of each of the clients, we refer them to the other practitioners in our center.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Can you give us an example then of someone, you mentioned people who have more difficulty than average in dealing with their emotional reactions to things? Can you give us a kind of an example of that and how that might be a problem?
When people have really heightened emotion, it sort of interferes in them functioning in daily living. So these might be individuals who are laying in bed all day because they're just so overwhelmed by their emotions. It might be people who, in efforts to try and lower the intensity of their emotions, start engaging in maladaptive behaviors. And so they come and they do a combination of individual therapy, and they go into what's called a dialectical behavior therapy skills group. And so it's a 15-week group where we're teaching them coping mechanisms. So there's 4 modules that they would go through. There's mindfulness, which is really focused on that mind and quieting down the mind. Distress tolerance skills, which are how do I tolerate all this distress that I'm in. Emotion regulation. So how do I lower the intensity of my emotions so I'm not sort of going like 0 to 60 at the drop of a hat and they're lasting for hours. Mm-hmm. And then interpersonal effectiveness skills. So how do I learn to communicate in a more effective way and get my needs met?
Okay, so the group would have people with different kinds of emotional distress
Different
problems.
levels of it.
Yeah.
Like you could have somebody with fear or anger, but they all go through those 4 modules together.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Interpersonal relationships must be difficult for people who have that kind of an issue, because the emotions are too strong to deal with, I guess, and sometimes the behavior can be explosive.
Yes, yeah. When people are having really heightened emotions, so the line of functioning, the communication to that thinking part of their brain actually stops, right? So they are very impulsive. Yeah, they might be yelling, engaging in some of those behaviors that actually decrease people wanting to be interpersonally relating to them.
And how common is this?
Oh, it's very common. Yeah, it's quite common. I bet you probably 4 or 5% of the population struggle with this emotional dysregulation.
And that's at the extreme end.
Yeah.
And then there are probably another 10 or 20% of people that from time to time could use these kinds of techniques to help them be more effective, I guess, in their daily lives.
They're actually starting to use a lot of this therapy techniques from the skills in school systems now with younger populations.
Oh, really?
Because they're not skills that just anyone knows often, right? They're skills that if you're not taught them, how do you know them?
Yes.
So they're really finding it helpful with school-age children and helping them just really get quieted down and focused to do their schoolwork, especially if there is any distress in their own personal lives.
You've talked about 4 dimensions. Could you kind of give an example of a technique that applies to each of those areas?
So when we look at mindfulness practice, mindfulness is really focusing your mind where you want it to go. So when people have heightened emotion, their mind's sort of flitting off in all these different directions, and the mindfulness techniques just really help them to center within themselves and focus where they want to focus versus focusing on the problem that's creating the emotion to begin with, because that just makes it go bigger.
So is that tied in with meditation as a tool, or?
So there's mindfulness,
Yeah.
which is just the practice of being more present, and then there's meditation, which is a deeper practice that people can do. And so we offer both of those for people as they get better and more practice at it. They can experiment in different ways and find what works for them.
So the first step, is, I guess, is being aware that this is going on.
Yeah.
And being there and feeling it and continuing to think through it, I take it.
A lot of times when people come in, they recognize that life isn't kind of going as well for them as they would like it to, or other people don't seem to be struggling as much as they are. And so they know something's not quite right for them, and so we listen to them and hear what they have to say, and then we help them sort through what they need.
Because it doesn't come across as a kind of a, you know, classic mental health kind of an issue. It's just on a continuum. They're just a little too far on one end of that emotional reaction.
Absolutely.
So the second aspect after mindfulness was?
Distress tolerance skills. So this is about when I'm having all these intense emotions, what are some tools that I can use to not make things worse? Which is, the making things worse is the behavior everybody sees, right? The yelling or the throwing things or acting out behaviors in that way. And so the skills that they learn, they all build on the premise of mindfulness. So we're mindfully engaging in an activity, or we're mindfully soothing ourselves, or we're mindfully engaging in holding ice cubes to put our focus somewhere else.
Okay.
And then emotion regulation skills. That's the third one.
How long with each module on average would someone?
So each module we teach over 3 weeks.
Okay.
So over the 15 weeks, it starts with 2 weeks of the mindfulness, and then we do 3 weeks of distress tolerance. Then we come back to mindfulness again, because it's the core skill in the dialectical behavior therapy. And so it's another 2 weeks of mindfulness, then 3 weeks of emotion regulation, 2 weeks of mindfulness, 3 weeks of the interpersonal effectiveness skills.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Okay, so the emotional regulation?
What is it that is contributing to us having these heightened emotions, and how do I sort of insert a pause button? So we talk about what makes us more vulnerable to our emotions. So if we're not getting enough sleep, if our eating is not balanced, if we're not exercising, if we're not taking medications as prescribed, or tending to any colds or physical illness that we might have. Chronic pain, for example, is another thing that it creates distress for people.
So that's where the integrative aspects happen, isn't it?
It certainly helps people to come more in touch with those sensations in a very gentle way, and to listen to their bodies differently, and helps in the settling process, which is part of mindfulness and part of regulation.
Yeah, so you're not just dealing with one symptom, you're looking at the whole picture at that point.
Absolutely.
I see. Okay. Now what about the techniques for interpersonal interaction?
So the interpersonal skills, there's a lot of acronyms in the dialectical behavior therapy.
Give us one that's not.
That's
we
not
won't
too
be able to go
hard.
into too much detail because we don't have much time left. But yeah, so what? Give us an example.
One of them is called the Dear Man, and the Dear Man is actually helping people create a script where they can go through and either ask people for help or say no. So it's all around setting boundaries and being more assertive and doing it all in a really factual manner. Because when we get heightened emotions, we often can start interpreting what happened, and then we make that interpretation fact. So the Dear Man really helps us just stick to the concrete pieces of what's happening.
So analyze it properly and then take actions without letting the emotions carry you off.
Right.
And you manage that within a few minutes after you've gone through all these.
Hopefully.
That's the goal.
It takes a little practice, no doubt, no doubt.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We've been talking to Cheri Woolsey of Integrative Minds. She's a psychologist. Inspired Minds, sorry. And it's Geneviève Wright, who's an integrative energy healing practitioner. Thanks a lot. Please stay with us. In just a moment, we continue en français.